So today, I don't know about you, but I'm very excited. I'll tell you why I'm excited. Because we are going to do something today which, I don't know if I should admit this on camera, I'm ashamed, but something that I haven't done for far too long. And that is something that every yeshiva bacha, every Torah man sees as what is considered, I suppose, one of the most seminal svarim, fundamental svarim in terms of the current derech halimud that is prevalent in the yeshiva world, known as the Brisker derech. Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, really revolutionized the Torah world and its approach to Lomdus. And I'll give you a short introduction. Forgive me, I know some of you will be potentially be familiar with, and I'm not going to talk about who Reb Chaim was, the Rav of Brisk, but besides it being a genius beyond compare, but he introduced an approach to learning which, although it's called the Brisker Derech, the emes is, it has become virtually universal. When you learn in Ponovitch, or you learn in the Mir, or you learn it's become so prevalent, it's almost inaccurate to refer to it just as the Brisker Derech, as if it's only learnt in Brisk. And I would like to give you a very short introduction to the analytical approach that he took to questions using a device. Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Noach. I like to use this to explain it conceptually. The Pasuk says at the beginning of Noach, Eila told us Noach ish tzaddik, Tomim hoya b'doirosov. These are the generations of Noach. These are the progeny, the children of Noach. Noach was a tzaddik. Obvious question. Noach, you said these are the children of Noach, and then you said he's a tzaddik. You were in the middle of telling us who his children were. What happened? Rashi gives two answers. Number one, says Rashi, Kiven shehiz kiroi siper bishvachai. You mentioned Noach. I have a legitimate reason why I digressed. There's a pasuk in Mishlei, Zecher tzaddik livracha. I have a reason. Dova acher, says Rashi. Another pshat. Lelamedcha. First pshat, he didn't say lelamedcha, to teach you. In this pshat, he says lelamedcha. This comes to teach you. She'ikar toldoisehem shel tzadikim ma'asim tovim. The primary toldois of a tzaddik are their good deeds. You see the difference conceptually between these two answers? I'll explain it, and I'll give you a very simple mashal. Okay? Teacher says to a kid comes late to school. The teacher says to the kid, why are you late? It's 9:15. You start school at 9. How can you walk in late? There's two ways you can answer that. Here's two possible answers. Number one, my father was driving me to school and his car broke down. There was a big traffic jam. There was a big crash. You can read it on the news. Fine. Mm-hmm. Another answer would be, teacher, your watch is wrong. Your watch is, it's not, I'm not late. It's exactly 9:00. One, the first approach, acknowledges the validity of the question and offers an answer. Even after the answer, the question still stands. Why were you late? Uvda, it's a fact. You were late. That requires an explanation. I have a reason for it. The car broke down, leaves on the line, whatever. Yeah. The other one says,
I'm going to prove to you.
I'm going to show you your question never started. Your question was based on a false assumption. You attack the question and show that conceptually your question arose from a misunderstanding of the very issue that we are discussing. Let's go back to the Rashi. Eila told this Noach ish tzaddik. I raised my eyebrows. Shem chaman yofes. What do you mean he's a tzaddik? What? Good question, says Rashi in the first answer. Great question. I acknowledge the validity of your question, and we're going to get to his Toldos shortly. But you want to know why I interjected something which is apparently random and not connected, I'll tell you why. I have a good reason. I've got a good excuse. Because Shlomo HaMelech tells us in Mishlei, Zeicher Tzadik Livracha. You mention a Tzadik, you should say something nice about him. Kiven shehiz kiroi, siper b'shvachai. But what I'm actually doing is talking about shvachai. I'm actually not. I acknowledge your kasha will always stand. I did not immediately say who his toldos were, but I have a legitimate and a good reason. Davar acher, says Rashi. Your question is false. It is based on an incorrect, a superficial understanding of what toldos means. Lelamedecha. This is coming to teach you. You thought that toldos of a person are his physical children. Yeah, they also are. I'm not denying the fact that they also, at some level, qualify as toldos. But that's not really what the word toldo means. Lelamedcha, to teach you, she'ikar toldoseim shel tzadikim. Your question was invalid. These are the toldos of Noach. Noach ish tzadik is his talmidim. Your question was false. It derived from a superficial and incorrect analysis of what we are discussing. Says the Maharal, by the way, now they're just mentioning it, Kiven Sheiz Kiroi. The Maharal there in Goraria, beautiful Goraria, the Maharal says, what's the pshat? He says a person is a field of potential. You know, I think it was the Alter von Kelm, was the Alter von Sabotka, I forget, who in a certain town, said about a certain town, it's a lebendike beis hakvaros. There are people walking around with matzevos on their heads, as if, here there's a goin buried, there's a tzaddik buried, they haven't realized their potential, so they're buried. Man is created with potential. If you take that potential and you bring it to the fore and you actualize it and it crystallizes and it materializes, you give birth to yourself, to who you really should be. Your main toilda is you gave birth to yourself. You took innate, inherent potential and you developed and created yourself. You gave, so to speak, you gave birth to yourself. Your ikka toildas, you now are a totally different being. There can be no greater toilda than you being who you can and ought to be. Ikkar toildeseyem is masim tovim. That is, I like to use this as an example, perhaps is not the right word, but perhaps to give you an insight conceptually as to how Reb Chaim and the Brisker of the so-called, the famous Tzvei Dinim, we say in Litvish Yiddish, 2 dinim, meaning what the hallmark of his approach was, whenever there is a question, is to actually demonstrate that the question is based on a lack of deep understanding of each of the two things, the thing and the thing you're asking from, that actually they're apples and pears. They are choluk b'yesoid dinam. They are the so-called famous Brisker 2 dinim. You thought, because superficially they look the same, they look similar, and therefore you thought it was legitimate to ask a question from one that one seems to challenge the other. Reality is that when you take each of these in its context and you drill down to its shoresh, then you realize that there never was a question in the first place. One is fundamentally rooted, it's a din in this, and the other one is a din in something totally different. And that is for you, if I may, that is just perhaps doesn't do it full justice, but that is kind of the Brisker approach. Having said that, yesterday we saw on page 8, and we do need to return to Reb Moshe. We've only done really one page of the Tshuva of Reb Moshe. We haven't even finished the whole page. Let's just quickly recap what we saw in Reb Moshe, and then we will move on to the Reb Chaim, which is on page, where's it gone? Maybe it's on the previous page. Sorry. Where's it gone? Reb Chaim is on page 4, which we'll come to in a minute, okay? But let's just remind ourselves what we learned yesterday. Let's just do a very quick summary, yeah? Mm-hmm. So what Reb Moshe did was, he said that we have 2 Tosfosim, right? We have a Tosfos in Sanhedrin Nun Tes, which says it is forbidden for a Jew to abort a fetus. It says it's not permitted. Reb Moshe demonstrated that when it says it's not permitted on what basis? It's Ritzicha. And I'm not going to go over the proofs. He showed within the Tosfos itself that it is fundamentally based on an Issur Ritzicha, except that it isn't punishable by death. But it is fundamentally an Issur Ritzicha. Then he asked, well, what about the Tosfos in Nida, where in two places Tosfos uses the language mutar? Yeah. Who remembers what did he say?
It's a mistake of the
Torah Sofer. Said it's absolutely, and he proved it. Right. He proved it two ways. Two ways he proved it. Who can remember?
From Goises.
Good. Well done. Thank you. From the proof from Goises, because otherwise the proof from Goises doesn't make any sense. You don't have any equivalence moving from being allowed to kill to having to be Mechal Shabbos. There's just no equivalence there. And the other thing he said was, what was his other proof? I've gone blank. Hold on a second. One proof was from Goises. And the other one was Misvara. There would be Goises and Misvara, the moral equivalence. Those are the two things. Fine. Therefore, so Rav Moshe is paskening that to abort a fetus for a Jewish woman is absolutely Ritzicha. Now, he then quoted the Rambam. The Rambam, who seems not to learn like Rashi, right? Rashi learns Lav Nefeshu. Again, we've got two statements in the Mishnah in Ohalos. Rashi explains the pshat in the first statement in the Mishnah is because why choitrin aver because it's not a nefesh. Yotza, then it's a nefesh. It's a roidef, says the Gemara, Mishamaya Koradfala, which we would normally understand, and this is important, I want to stress this, we would normally understand is that therefore he's not a roidef, because it's Mishamaya Koradfa, and that's why we don't treat it as a roidef. When it's inside, the child is the fetus is a roidef, but the fetus is a roidef, but it isn't a nefesh. Mm-hmm. Outside, once it's born, then it is a nefesh. It is a nefesh and a roidef, but it's an unusual roidef. It's mishamaya de karadfa, and therefore a noigim by. Yes.
But do we say outside is a roidef, dishmaya, so to speak, because it's outside, or just what was the exact?
That is a good question. It would seem that the Gemara says Mishamaya Koradfa only on the Sefer, not on the Reisha, remember?
That's the reason.
Only on the Sefer. Yeah. Because in the Reisha, I don't need to the Mishamaya Koradfa. Right. Because it's not a nefesh. Mm-hmm. There's no equivalence, it's not a nefesh. Okay. The Rambam, however, this is where it became more complicated. The Rambam says in the Reisha, why do we... So, ask ourselves the question in the Reisha. Why chayt chinoisei ever ever? According to Rashi, because it's not a nefesh. According to the Rambam says explicitly, why we chayt chinoisei ever ever? Because he's a roidef. And that is very problematic. If he's a roidef, then that means you're saying he is a nefesh. Yeah. So he's a roidef. So then how does the Rambam understand this? Why is it any different to the Sefer? It's Mishamaya Korad for law only when it's born, and when it's inside, it's also Mishamaya Korad for law. V'zehu tivoi shel olam. So the Rambam himself seems to be really difficult to understand what the Rambam is saying. So, says we actually did not do, there's a paragraph here that we didn't do. Let's do this paragraph, and then we're going to move on to Reb Chaim. Okay, it's based. That's right. Umashe kosher al Rambam. The Reb Moshe is now going to address the apparent inconsistency or the difficulty internally of understanding the Rambam. And while we do this, the reason I want to do this paragraph is also because, like you saw yesterday, Reb Moshe's confidence. It's a very bold thing to say. It's obviously a copyist's error. Torah Sofer. It's not a cop-out. Chas v'shalom, you need to be very careful. You know, some people would say when they're faced with something that they can't really explain, they say, well, explain it away. Well, it's probably a Chas v'shalom. Moshe is not saying that. He brought us two proofs.
One from Svara.
One from Svara, one from the Raya, and also to make it consistent with the Tosfos in Sanhedrin. Now, Uma shekosha al harambam. De'im nechshava uber bedin roidef. Hoylon lahatigam biyotso roishoi. Kida hiksha rav chizda b'gemara Sanhedrin. What is now difficult to understand on the Rambam is that if the fetus is considered a roidef, then it should be mutter to cut him up even when he is born, as indeed Rav Chizda asks in Sanhedrin and Tes. Elot tzorich leimar, kida tiretz Rav Huna. You must say like Rav Huna answers in the Gemara there in Sanhedrin, Shani hosam dishamaya karad felo veloi nechshav roidef. You must say, what does Rav Huna answer? The mishamaya karadfa. The redifus is not coming from the fetus, it's minash shamayim, and therefore the child is not a roidef. Once it's born, it's not a roidef. He says very clearly, v'lo nechshav roidef. Ukidekosav gam ho Rambam behil chazu. As indeed the Rambam paskins the Sefer. Im mishahoitzi roishe ein noigin boy, she'ein doichin nefesh, mipnei nefesh. We're back to the allgemeine halacha.
Yeah.
Remember, the halacha in kol ha-Torah kula, in any situation other than roidef, what is the nomenclature? I think you say it in Russian as well, no? Nomenclatura. But it's in English also. It's a good technical term. The title, the nomenclature, the way that we address this in a life kill or be killed situation. What do we say? Ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. That is a language that you use when there is no roidef present.
Right.
Once there's a roidef, you don't say ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. So the Rambam is clearly saying that once is born, ein doichin nefesh. That's exact lashon. That means there's no roidef here. Excuse me, Rabbi Rambam. A minute ago you said he is a roidef. He was inside. He's a roidef. Now he's not. What on earth is going on? Yes.
Rob, what happened with on the way? We had an idea of their rot film to each other.
I shouldn't have opened my big mouth when I threw that in. That's my problem. I shouldn't. We're going to need to come back to that at some point. But for the moment, the simple, says Rav Moshe Pashtus, the simple way of understanding the Rambam is, and the Gemara is, and the proof that the Rambam learns that way, by the way, is because he uses the language that we always use when it isn't a relative situation. Ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. Yeah. Kidakos of Gamarama balochazu ve'imish shahitzi roishi ein noigin boy shein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. Is that to be shalayla? Kosav hakesef Mishnah writes the Kesef Mishnah shezehu peirush al mishamaya korad feloshe b'Gemara. This is the explanation. When he says zehu tivoy shel olam, this is the way of the world, he's explaining, that is the Rambam's way of understanding the lashon of the Gemara, which says, Mishamaya korad fela. She'im kain, gam ho'uba shadayin b'mayav lehitzi reishi, nami en roidef mitam zeh. Asks the Kesef Mishnah, but then hold on a second. The Kesef Mishnah asks the question that any right-minded individual that sees the Rambam will ask. So hold on a second. So then the fetus, when it's inside, surely then it's also not a roidef. For the very same reason. That what? That it's Mishamayim. Says Reb Moshe, he kekol kushyos, sheloi efsha af ligdoilim letaretz, sheloi mevatlin divrei harambam, b'shvil shemuk shelahem le'elu ha'geonim, she'enon b'madrega lachlik al harambam. Very interesting hashkafic aside here in Reb Moshe. He says, when I was growing up, they used to say, very often Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and the Gemara even. The Gemara relatively often will ask and end up with the words, Kashya. Mm-hmm. Good question. Right. It's a good question. I don't have an answer. They say in the yeshiva world when Rabbi Akiva Eiger often just leaves something unresolved, and you work out how difficult it is by the language he uses. Mm-hmm. Does he just say tzarich iyun or tzarich iyun gadol? Mm-hmm. But he's quite happy to say there's a question. In Yiddish, they used to say, "Men shtat nicht na kasha." That's what we used to say in there. Yeah, it's a good question. The question is valid. I don't have a good answer. But that doesn't, just because you have the question doesn't mean that the thing is invalid. And this is what Rav Moshe is saying. He says it's like all questions which we seem to be unable to resolve, but that's not a reason to chas v'shalom to be mevatel the words of the Rambam, those elu hagoinim that were not on the same madrega to argue with him. And then he goes on. V'yodin shah Rambam yoda l'taretz. They knew that the Rambam had an answer. V'lo yisasru dvarov b'shvil zeh. But for that reason, they did not challenge his words. And then he says a most amazing thing. So simple once you think about it, but that's why it needs Reb Moshe. V'gam ha'go'onim b'doiroi shahoyu b'madrega lach l'kol Rambam. Even his contemporaries, who had the authority and the ability to argue on him, they knew that the Rambam had an answer. Maybe they didn't agree with it. Ach shesavru shetirutze le'nochain shehu dochuk ubahalocha zu. And then he says the most awesome thing. Anybody who has ever learned Rambam knows that the Raavad, in English we say, he wasn't backwards in coming forwards. In other words, some of the Raavad on the Rambam, Hasagas HaRaavad, he sometimes says very sharp ways of arguing. Zehevel. He'll sometimes say, this is rubbish. Mm-hmm. Or he argues with the Rambam very regularly, and often in very acerbic, often in very strong language. Very strong language. Or ze'enoi. This is just not so. Fascinating thing, says Reb Moshe, on this halacha. Uba halacha zu chazinon sha'af ho'raivad. Here is a Rambam which, in and of itself, shouts out for an explanation. It would appear to almost self-contradict. Mm-hmm. And the Raavad said not a word. He kept quiet. The Raavad, who is very happy and easy to jump at the Rambam when he disagrees with something, in very strong terms, af milah. Well, the Raavad didn't chap. So they knew the Rambam had a pshat. Maybe they didn't know it, or they didn't. But the Raavad kept quiet. Chol ha'masigim. The Lechem Mishnah, the Magid Mishnah, the Kesef Mishnah, nothing. They were ro'in lachlegav lo hisigu alav klal. Harei degam ha'Raavad u'shem hasigim. Sovri. That means they agreed with the reasoning of the Rambam. Remember, if they would have held like Rashi, they would have said, this is not the reason. It's because it isn't a nefesh. Rabbi Akiva Eiger asks. The Noda B'Yehuda asks. Interestingly, until then, nobody thought about it. It's glaringly evident the apparent internal inconsistency in the Rambam. Rabbi Akiva Eiger seems to be the first one. Very strange. Rabbi Akiva Eiger b'toisoiso al mishnayos asks this. But until then, it seems, despite the glaring question in this Rambam, they all kept shtum. Mm-hmm. They knew that the Rambam had a reason. Now we'll come to Letaritz. Next three more lines. Letaritz kushi Chabura zu ayin mashatiritz moron de doirois ha'acharoinim shelafonenu hagoyin Reb Chaim Alevi Zatzal b'sefer chidushei Rach Halevi Perek Aleph Mehilchas Ritzeach b'dovar nochain ma'oid. And this sets the scene now for us to learn Ashtikal Reb Chaim. Now, before we start, a quick word. This Reb Chaim, I bought myself. This is one of the newer editions of Reb Chaim. It's quite well known that the Chazon Ish published his Gilyonos, his questions on Reb Chaim. I mean, that itself. Remember, they're not quite contemporaries, but that the Chazon Ish dedicated time to writing Ha'oros almost on a contemporary is actually a measure of respect that he had for that it was such a monumental work, by the way, even though he often disagreed. And here he's also going to disagree on this one. The truth is, we could spend a long time. This is a compendium of various achronim who discuss directly on the Reb Chaim. And in fact, I'll just mention historically, there is potentially another version, another slightly different way of understanding this idea from Reb Chaim we're going to learn. Rabbi Zalman and Evan Ezel has a slightly different way of bringing it. Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, Zechon Levracha, also had a slightly different way, and there could be some differences. I'm not sure how far we're going to be able to get into this, but it is certainly an important Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim wrote his work, by the way. He was very, very careful. This we have b'Masorah, we know. Reb Chaim was very. It's another hallmark in Brisk is what they call emes, Torah's emes. It has to be Torah has to be Torah's emes, meaning if you're saying something, you have to be able to show that it's iron fit, it's clad, it is watertight. It is, you can't budge. Very often, sometimes in the yeshiva world, somebody makes a cholent, you may a svar of this, and and maybe we can say this, Efshe Kemen Zogen. In Brisk, that's anathema. In Brisk, that was anathema. Reb Chaim, as much as possible from his perspective, made a case that becomes solid. And he was very, very makbid the way he wrote it. He would spend hours, he would dictate it. There was a Slonim, a Chassid, actually, a Sheikhet. He would dictate it too, and often he would wonder about the words and would tear up sometimes after having written dictated for hours, because it wasn't quite emes. And this we know from first-hand accounts. So just to give you a sense of that, the way it was written with great precision. Okay, let's go. You're on page 4, yes?
Yes.
Avzu mitzvah sasei. First we quote the Rambam. Mitzvah sasei shalei lochis al nefesh haroidef. Lefichach chayru chachomim. Lefichach. Remember, the Rambam, this is going to be important, he is juxtaposing it to the Isur not to have pity on the nefesh of a roitzeach, of a roidef. Lefichach, therefore, zog the Rambam, that's why you are choitech the uber b'meyeha. Mipnei shu karoidef achrei lahirga. The Rambam couldn't be any clearer, absolutely explicit, that the reason that we don't have pity on this poor little fetus is because it is a roidef. And you can't have pity on a roidef. And now that's why you can actually sort of almost think of it, why he uses this as the example. Because there can be, if you use your emotions, and this is another whole schmooze, another hallmark of in Brisk was that you don't use your emotions to approach a mitzvah. The story is told of somebody, the Beis HaLevi, his son, yes, the Beis HaLevi, his father, Beis HaLevi, asked and invited somebody to come see him, and he said he's not feeling well. He was at a bris this morning and he fainted. And the basic said, I don't understand, it's a mitzvah. How can you faint? Meaning, and this is actually another quite important part of an approach to Torah and mitzvahs, is that you don't approach it with your emotions. It's a mitzvah. The definition of it is your emotional connection to it. It's slightly more, I shouldn't have mentioned it. There's a Beis HaLevi in Parshas Lech Lecha. It's a separate topic. Look on the Beis HaLevi if you're interested on Salach Lefanei V'Hei Tomim. But it's actually negay also to this week's Parsha, Vayera, because he consulted on Ereshkol and Mamre. What's he consulting for? Okay, you know what? I shouldn't have opened my mouth because but the reason I did was because to you and me, what could be, not to the secular world, sadly, what could be more emotive than a poor little fetus that you're going to cut up limb by limb and drag out? Right. That's why the Rambam brings it in the here and says, no rachmanas. It's a roidach. Lo sochos. Leficha chayru chachomim. It's a roidach. So he takes almost the most extreme example of it, where you would think, because normally a roidef, even if it's a 10-year-old kid or they've got some level of cognition, so you can kind of understand the thing. Today, by the way, we live in such a sad and cruel world. It's it's my body, I can do whatever I like. But leaving that aside, loy lochus al nefesh haroidef. There's a nefesh there.
Yeah. There's
a nefesh, but it's a roidef.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that. That's setting the scene. Lefichach, the Torah says, don't loisachos. However, ve'imi shahitzi roshei noigim b'shein doichen nefesh v'nei nefesh zeu tivah shalaylam. Ad kan l'shoyna. Zokt Reb Chaim. Yeah, we've got to focus. We've got to follow this. Okay, we're not going to finish it today. I'm sorry, but maybe tomorrow we'll finish. But let's do it properly. We've got to focus. Ukvahikshu al zeh. On page 4, yeah? You got to be with me. You got to be with me. Reb Chaim Alev and Rambam. He brings the Rambam, and then you got to follow with me. Ukvar hikshu al zeh. And they've asked on this, Mehod Isa Sanhedrin Dafayin base, Omar Rav Huna, Koton Roidef Nitzan Latzil Benafshoy, Esrei Reb Chisda Rav Huna, Yotzerei Negem Nebnei Shedech Nefesh Nefesh V'Amai Roidefu. Answers the Gemara, Shani Yosef Mishmai Korad Fala. Hare, says the Reb Chaim, Hare, what's pshat in the Gemara? Deloi Hava Roidef. Obviously, the answer is that he's not a Roidef. V'Hare Kenu Siyum Divrei HaRambam. And that indeed is how the Rambam finishes off. Delahochi, for that reason, b'yotza roishe ein doich nefesh mipnei nefesh, mishum dezehu tiva shaloilam, zu gesund, trotza loima, va'al kein lo yav a roidef. V'im kein, eich kosav ha-rambam, delahochi, b'yotza roishe hergen ha'ubem neshu roidef, kiven debem sloi choshiv roidef. It's such a question. Ubata, now. Yeah. So he says, that's a question on the Rambam, not on the Mishnah. Why? Because I can get out of the question on the Mishnah. How? Let's see. Ubatam ha-Mishnah tzorich loymar. In other words, he's going to at pains to explain how this is a problem fundamentally and primarily with the Rambam. Ubatam ha-Mishnah tzorich loymar delahochi b'lo yatzrosh enoigenosai mishum da'adayan loy hava nefesh. The Mishnah is okay. Why? Rashi. The Mishnah is not the problem. The Rambam is the problem. The Reisha in the Mishnah, like Rashi says, it's not a nefesh. V'nidcha mipnei pikuach nafsho shel ha'im. K'chol hadvorim shenidchin mipnei pikuach nefesh. Remember, you do anything for pikuach nefesh. You eat chazir for pikuach nefesh, you mechalel Shabbos, and you get rid of something which isn't a nefesh. Why not? Of course. Aval mashakosav ha'rambam delahochi hergenos mishum din roidef tzorich iyun. De beroidef Surely, if he's a roidef, it makes no difference whether the roidef's head has popped out or hasn't popped out. A roidef is a roidef. If he's a roidef, what's going on? Ubiur das harambam bazenira. And here you begin to see the approach of Reb Chaim. Ubiur das harambam bazenira. Dahine yisoid din. You need to get used to also the Reb Chaim, the language. Yisoid din harigas horoidef. Haloihu midin hatzolas hanirdav. The principle, the halachic principle that underpins the killing of the roidef is saving the nirdaf, the one who is being pursued. It's a din of hatzolah. Okay? Now, I'm not going to digress because go on.
So if we cannot prove a certain hatzalah of the other one, then it automatically makes the other one not a roidef, no?
You're going into very interesting territory. We will come back to this, but not today. It's a shaila in Rabbi Kiva Eiger there, and then there's another side sugya, which becomes a whole nother, the Twin Towers and shooting down the planes and all that sort of stuff, and an Israeli policeman can seize a terrorist getting on the bus, and he can kill the terrorist just before he gets on the bus, but he can't be sure that he might also kill the person next to him on the bus stop, but not the. This is all part of it. So yes, I acknowledge the validity of your point, but not.
Okay. I thought maybe that's the.
No. Okay. 1 second.
Yeah.
Nochmal said Reb Chaim, the yisoid of the din of killing the roidef is from the perspective. The imperative is saving the nirdaf.
Right.
Ve'ikroihu shenefesh haroidef nidche mipnei pikuach nafsho shel hanirdaf. The fundamental understanding here is that the nefesh of the roidef is overridden for the pikuach nefesh of the nirdaf.
So he can't be a roidef. We cannot say we cannot push away one nefesh for the other. We cannot say there is no difference between the nefashot if he's already out another. Right. All good. Yeah.
Not sure what you're trying to say.
Me neither. Okay.
Sorry?
All good.
Okay, let's continue. We're still very, very early on.
Yeah.
Okay, again, the principle of roidef is based on the halachic imperative to save the life of the nirdaf. That's all he said so far. Okay, the Sani b'Sanhedrin daf ayin dalit. Rabbi Yehuda ben Shmuel, I don't know who it is. Here is an important halacha. a Roidev, a Reuven is running after Shimon to kill him. If it is relatively straightforward to incapacitate Reuven, you don't need to shoot him dead. You could just shoot him in the legs, and you don't shoot him in the legs, and you shoot him in the heart, you're chayiv misa. That's a Gemara. Again, if he could be saved by getting rid of one of the legs, for example, or shooting the gun out of his hand and shooting his hand off, yes, and you didn't, neheragolov, then that's murder. Hare, says Reb Chaim, what do you see from here? The kol hahariga shel roidev. He's using this Gemara to demonstrate that the halakhic principle this is based on is exclusively rak lahatzil es hanirdav. It's purely a hatzalah imperative for the nirdav. Elo. But haloi b'chol malkom, normally anything, if it isn't a roidev situation, normally we say ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. Usually we say, if it wasn't roidev, if it's a question, for example, of kill or be killed, right? There we say we can't get involved. Ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh, right? V'hocha b'roidev have a gzeras hakosov. The gzeras hakosov of roidev is that here we do say doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. It's a gzeras hakosov that when one person chases another, even though normally we say ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh, in this case we are doichin the nefesh of the roidev. V'harei zehu halav shekosov Rambam sheloi lochois al nefesh haroidev. That's why the Rambam says this is what it means, because I would be tempted to say, hold on, I know in Jewish thought that all lives are equally valuable, so I should really have pity on him. Who knows? That is, this is fundamentally what is going on over here. By a roidev, there's a gzeres hakosov that the life of the nirdaf overrides the life of the roidev. That's a gzeres hakosov, and therefore loy sochos, don't have pity. But that's only in order for hatzalah. Therefore, if you can save the life in another way, then you have to do so. Now he goes on, and this is a classic chakira, a yeshivish, it's not even yeshivish, you'll see, it sounds very subtle. Here he's going to ask a chakira. Elodakati yesh listapek. He says, okay, but there is still room for doubt here. Im kol agzeras hakosuv de roidev hu rak ba'atzmoi shel ha-roidev sheyidocha mipnei pikuach nafshe shel ha-nirdaf avol iker ha-hatzalah shel ha-nirdaf hu mishum din pikuach nefesh shel kol ha-toiro kulo. He's going to put a chakira. Here's the first tzad, the first option on the menu, the first possible way of understanding this. That what? That the gzeras hakosov is that the hurak ba'atzmoi shel ha-roidev, that the nefesh of the roidev is overridden because of the imperative to save the life of the nirdaf. But the imperative to save the life of the nirdaf is a general halacha, which applies like in any other case in the Torah. That's option A. Okay. Or oidenema, or maybe I say no. Gam ikar ha'hatzalah shel hanirdaf hi mehach gzeras hakosov shel haroidev. Maybe included in the imperative, included in this gzeras hakosov. Remember, we've said there is a gzeras hakosov to say that normally we say ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. In a case of a roidev, there's a gzeras hakosov, an ausnam, right? It's a gzeras hakosov. It's an anomaly. Doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. How far does that gzeras hakosov extend? Does it perhaps only extend to saying that the life of the nirdaf is worth more than the life of the roidev? Once I say that, then maybe the regular halacha of hatzalas nefashos kicks in. Or do I say no? Actually, there's more going on under the hood of this new piece of legislation of the gzeras hakosov. The gzeras hakosov doesn't just merely tell me that the nefesh of the nirdaf is worth more. It actually creates a higher and a fresh level of imperative of hatzalah of a nirdaf. There's a new din hatzalah of a nirdaf, and that's all included in the gzeras hakosov of roidev. You're looking very blank. Again. Now, this is, I must tell you, this is very subtle. And it sounds like, I don't know, angels dancing on the head of a pin. Who cares? There's going to be a massive nafkamina. Just wait. You have to have patience for that. Obviously, I'm here to waste our time, just to come with strange and bizarre again. And it's really important that you get into this way of thinking. I think we'll just manage to get the Chakira done today. We've got 5 more minutes, let's try and get the Chakira down. Again, normally speaking, we say that all lives are equal. Right? Remember the Rashi Psachim we saw yesterday. Normally I say, Ein derech nefesh mipnei nefesh. Now there comes along an ausnam. It is called Reidif. Now, we definitely know that this Gzeiras HaKosov tells me that in this situation of Reidif, you are deicha one nefesh mipnei nefesh. Don't have pity on the nefesh of the Reidif. The nefesh of the nirdaf in this situation is more valuable than that of the Reidif, and therefore you can kill the Reidif, but why are you killing the Reidif though? Why am I killing the Reidif? Only to save. Now, where does it tell me to save lives? That's the halacha b'kol Torah kula. Yeah. There's no new element of obligation to save that is related to the Gzeiras HaKosov of Reidif. I have the regular halacha b'chol Torah kula, the algemein halacha that you always have to save a life. That stands. Normally we can't because there's a constraint on my obligation to save a life because I don't know which one to save. Here the Torah tells you, I'll tell you which one. In this situation, I'll tell you which one. The minute I know that I can say that one life is worth more than the other, then the regular Kol HaTorah Kula Halacha of Hatzalah kicks in. Because the only reason it didn't kick in until now is because we normally say Ein derech nefesh mipnei nefesh. Once the Gzeiras HaKosov of Reidif lifts that limitation, then the regular Halacha of Hatzalah kicks in. That's the first tzad. Or maybe, says Reb Chaim, or maybe there's something more subtle going on. Maybe the Gzeiras HaKosov of Reidif doesn't just tell me that the nefesh of the nirdaf is worth more than the nefesh of the Reidif, but actually it includes in here a new piece, a new imperative of Hatzalah in this particular situation. It's a new halach of Hatzalah. You with me? It's not the regular halach of Hatzalah. Ein derech nefesh mipnei nefesh remains. Okay. Here, the Torah says we don't say ein derech nefesh mipnei nefesh. That's Gzeiras HaKosov. But included in this, that the nefesh of the nirdaf is worth more than the nefesh of the reidif, is a built-in new piece of legislation to go and save the nefesh of the nirdaf. It's a new chiyuv of Hatzalah. What difference is it going to make? We'll have to see that tomorrow. It sounds like it's totally abstract. He's going to show a big difference. Did you hear it? Okay, this is Reb Chaim. Okay, all right. May I suggest we'll leave it here for today.